Welcome to From Tip-Off to Toronto, celebrating women's basketball, culture, and community. I'd like to start by saying a quick thank you to the Combine for hosting us and to our sponsors at Electrolyte? That's how we say it? Destination Toronto, Shark Beauty, and the Highball Group for their support for women's sports and today's event. So before we get into our talk, I want to see a show of hands. Raise your hand if this year you watched a women's sports game on TV or social media. Okay? Did you go to a women's sports game? Did you buy women's sports merchandise this year? Look at all those hands. The momentum we're seeing in women's sports is amazing. And really, it's about time. It was about time yesterday, right? So for anyone around you who says no one watches women's sports, we beg to differ. Some of the stats that we've been seeing have definitely showed us that the stats and the data does not lie. The 2024 WNBA season broke all kinds of records. It was the most viewed regular season ever, with an average of 1.19 million viewers for the regular season. That's ESPN. And also, this season had the highest attendance, with over 2.3 million people in attendance watching women's sports, tuning in, and going to these games. For Game 5, who watched Game 5? And we'll get into Olivia's story of where she was on Game 5 as well, right in the thick of it. ESPN broadcast peaked at 3.3 million viewers for Game 5 of the WNBA playoffs. Like, we're talking history-breaking stats here. And we all can't forget about the WNBA expansions. We know Golden State Valkyries will have their team in 2025. Toronto and Portland will be getting a team in 2026. Woo! So to talk a little bit more about the growth of women's sports, the culture, we're going to get into our talk here. But before we get into the discussion part, I want to give you a little bit of context of these wonderful panelists. So Olivia Ho, to my left, is the owner of The Give and Grow, whose mission is to harness the power of sport to inspire the next generation of girls and women. Since 2020, she has hosted over 94 workshops in 14 different cities and inspired over 2,500 participants of all ages. She has worked with global brands such as Nike, Jordan, Puma, Adidas, Foot Locker, Canada Basketball, Canada Goose, Hennessy, Shopify, the NBA, KFC, and has worked with NBA teams such as the Brooklyn Nets, Sacramento Kings, Golden State Warriors, Portland Trail Blazers, the Toronto Raptors, and Dallas Mavericks. And she is busy. Whitney Bell, with over 16 years of experience, Whitney currently serves as the Chief Marketing Officer for the WNBA Toronto. She's a dynamic marketing executive known for cultivating brand love and delivering growth. Throughout her career, she has navigated diverse landscapes, from pioneering disruptor brands, Lift and Clutch, to reinvigorating established icons like Dove, and always with a commitment to fostering positive and social impact. And I'll touch very quickly on myself. I'm the founder of a media platform called She's4Sports. We launched in 2016. Our sole mission was to amplify the voices of women in sport, specifically Canadian women in sport, because we know Canadian women are definitely helping to build the foundation of sport in this country. And also we hold events. We want to create safe spaces like this for fans of women's sports and women in sports to come and connect and network together. We also work with other sports organizations on initiatives around gender equity and inclusion, and also with an effort to increase participation for girls in sports. So that's a little bit about She's4Sports. So let's stick to the growth of women's sports, specifically women's basketball. What are you most excited to see, and how has it impacted your business?
I'll start. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming. It's actually like, if you were standing or sitting where I am right now and like looking out at everyone, this is such an amazing feeling to see you all come out on a Tuesday night to support women's sports. And there were so many people that couldn't even get tickets to the event. We had so much outreach, and we were like, okay, maybe, there is something to be said about, the women's sports culture. in Canada and in Toronto. And so it's so beautiful for us to be up here, and it's an honor to be able to speak to all of you here. I had the opportunity to go to Game 5 in New York. It was something that happened really, really last minute, and I'll touch briefly on that. I was actually speaking on a panel here at the Combine and was talking about brand partnerships. And so Mark, who was kind of my co-host or panelist that day, was talking about how sometimes brands, they'll collaborate and you may not know what the synergy is between them, but the more you dig deeper, it starts to make a little bit more sense. And so he said something about Coinbase and the WNBA. And so he was talking about how the WNBA is starting to accept crypto, or they want to start to accept crypto, and Coinbase was one of their partners. And at that panel, this was the Saturday before the game, I was like, hey, I know someone that works at Coinbase. And so fast forward the rest of the day, I randomly messaged him and was like, hey, are you going to the game in New York tomorrow? I'm thinking about last minute flying into New York and just being a part of a historic moment. And he was like, yeah, if you want to come, I got you on the ticket. And I was like, all right.
Shoot your shot. Shoot your shot.
Shoot your shot. That is, yes, literally. And so he said, I got you on the ticket. I have some tickets with Coinbase, obviously. And so I booked my flight. I left literally the next morning. And then when he sent me the ticket the next morning, I looked it up. It was like VIP 9 or something. I was like, oh, this sounds fancy. And I looked it up on the map, and it was 2 rows behind the Lynx bench. So I was able to be at Game 5 courtside, which was such an amazing, obviously, game, overtime. And so to be a part of that, again, after this historic season, and to be amidst all of it with that and the parade and everything that happened afterwards, it was actually one of those moments where, yeah, it felt like a dream. It still feels like a dream.
To pinch yourself.
Yes, exactly. But I think the cool thing was, as I was kind of navigating that space and sitting courtside, I ended up running into a lot of different women in the basketball space that I knew in New York. I ran into a bunch of different friends. Amanda was actually there as a photographer as well. So I was able to I was running into people that I knew in the New York basketball space. And I thought to myself, you know what, this isn't a once in a lifetime opportunity. I'm actually meant to be here. I've worked with a lot of these women in different spaces, and seeing them and as my peers be in the same space as me, it just felt like a little bit of a reaffirming moment, and a little bit of a testament to, the partnerships that I've been able to build and the relationships I've been able to build with people, regardless of whether it's business or not.
And Whitney, what are you excited about with the growth of women's basketball, or just the moment that we're experiencing right now?
Yeah, and quickly, I will also say I feel very honored to be here. I'm about 6 weeks into this new role and been meeting the most incredible people, and feel very honored to be part of this community. I see a lot of familiar faces too, so thanks for coming out and supporting. In terms of growth, there's so much I'm excited about. One stat, as we're starting to meet with partners, we've been talking about is that viewership in Canada for the WNBA grew over 400% this year, which is crazy. And I think with that just comes more exposure, and that's what we need. It's just more games on broadcast and more people talking about it and on social. I have a 3-year-old son, and we watched Game 5 at home. I wasn't lucky enough to get to go to the game.
That's the second best.
Yeah. But when we were watching it, he's watching. They're just athletes to him. It's not like women's sports versus men's. And he thinks, he's like, oh, I just want to play like them. And to me, that's really exciting. It's to bring this team to Toronto and to Canada. It's going to be amazing for young women, but also for young men. And so, yeah, there's so much I'm excited about for the growth, but I think that exposure is really the biggest piece.
Yeah, I like that comment about, the impact for young girls and young boys. I went to see an Indiana Fever WNBA game in June, and I did interview some of the families that were there, and one that stood out in my mind was a dad. His daughter was 5 or 6. She didn't really know everything that was going on, but she could tell that she was in a fun place with her dad and, watching the talent and the athleticism on the court. So I love to talk to the dads as well, and just kind of, get their sense as to, what this means for them. But there was also a young girl. She was about 10 or 12, and she had an Angel Reese jersey on. But she also said, she's like, I like Caitlin too. And she's like, I can like both of them. I'm like, yes, you can. So it was nice to talk to the young fans and to kind of see the excitement around the girls, and also me be excited for them that they've got these role models. They've got that line of sight to a pathway that they can also play basketball and potentially potentially go to the WNBA if they want to. So that's what I'm excited about. In terms of career, because we know sometimes at these events we have young women or people who want to get into sports. Can you both touch a little bit on how did you find your place in sports? And can each of you talk a little bit about navigating that?
Sure. So I did not have a traditional pathway into sports. I grew up an athlete. I played every single sport under the sun. I have two sisters and we were all pretty athletic. I played varsity soccer at Queens, and I loved sports, but I never saw it really as a pathway for myself. So I went into business, started my career. I was in like CPG, Ainka mentioned, but I worked on Dove for a really long time. And I was lucky that when I was working on Dove, we did partnerships with like Maple Leaf Sports and Entertainment. And so that was kind of the first time I had this like foray into like what it might be like to work in sports. Some of the partners I've worked with are here tonight, and that was such a positive experience. But then I actually went into tech. So I worked at Lyft, like the ride sharing company, for a while. And then most recently I was at like a Series A, like really tiny startup. And so I had a recruiter reach out to me about this role. And at first I thought it was like a joke. I thought someone was like pranking me on LinkedIn. And I was like, oh, like I never even had considered like at this point in my career, like going from like tech and startup into sports. But one of the things they were looking for was like, this team really is a startup right now. There's 5 of us, and they liked that background. And so this is truly my dream job. It's like marrying my like love of, business, women's sports. My past as a very former athlete. I would not consider myself a current athlete. But yeah, so I give that advice to people too. I don't think you need to have necessarily like a traditional pathway.
I like that you mentioned that, because I played volleyball all the way up into high school. And then when I got to university, I didn't feel like, the counselors were saying, hey, don't forget to try out for the team, or anybody who's putting any importance on women's sport. And if I could go back, I would have definitely tried out at the varsity level. But I always kept connected to sports. It's like, if there was a game going on, or a friend of mine was, competing in a basketball game or football or something, I'm like, get me a ticket or I'll get a ticket, and I just wanted to show up. I wanted to be in that competitive space. And then when I started talking to women in 2016 about what were their experiences like with sport, how do they feel about being a sports fan? And I got all these comments of, I didn't like going to this game because there was a guy sitting beside me mansplaining, what baseball is to me. Or I tried to go to the bar and I asked them to change the channel because I wanted to watch a Raptors game, and they wouldn't change it. They'd look at me like, why is this woman asking to change the channel? And I also had colleagues that were sports fans that said, like, we don't see our stories on social. This was in 2016. We don't see our stories on the TV. And specifically the journey of a Canadian woman in sport and their story, their challenges. So I just said, maybe I could do something about it. And it has grown over the years. But I think, just like Whitney said, you could stay curious. You could stay aligned to sport. There's room in sports for all of us. Some of us might be athletes, coaches. Some of us might be working in the front office or starting your own business. But there is a place for all of you in sport. And that's how I felt when I started my company. Olivia?
Yeah, I love this conversation because it really just shows you that it doesn't really matter, what you took in school, where you're working. You can always pivot to do something different. It doesn't matter if it's in sport, it doesn't matter if it's art, whatever it is. There's this kind of shift right now, I think, in general, where there is a push for specifically women to be able to chase their dreams, to go after that thing, break that kind of conventional norm, which is kind of what I did. And so that's kind of the story of the Give and Grow. During the pandemic, I was actually working at the hospitals, downtown Toronto, St. Mike's. I did ultrasounds of the heart, so I was a cardiac sonographer. I was working there for about 7 years full time. My background was in kinesiology at McMaster, and ended up doing a post-grad program that brought me to St. Michael's downtown. I was working full time, and then the pandemic hit. And so while working at the hospital, having to kind of go in and physically like gown up, the shield, everything like that, I wanted something creative to do on the side. And so I had some old basketballs in my closet. I cut them, I spray painted them in my parking garage of my condo, and I put little plants in them. And I just posted on my Instagram. I was like, hey guys, look what I made. And then a lot of friends started reaching out to me and saying like, Olivia, can you make me one? Can you make me one? And so I thought this could be something fun to kind of take my mind off of like being at the hospital and what was going through there. And at the same time, while I worked at the hospital, I also worked at a kids sports facility called MLSC Launchpad, where I ran all of the girls' sport programming for about 5 years. So I've always been involved specifically with women's sport, with girls programming, whether that's after school programs, coaching on the side. I just knew how important sport was to me, playing as a kid, that I wanted to be able to stay close to that, whatever, wherever I was in life. And so when there was this opportunity now to combine, my love for sport and thinking about how to tap into the community side, I started to host these workshops for the girls at Launchpad, where they got to kind of customize their own little basketball planters. And while we had them in the space, we would talk about, the lessons you could learn from sport, the power of sport and what we can take away from it. And so it became this thing where all the money that I was making from selling the product would just get funneled into these community workshops while still working at the hospital. And then there was a moment where the Raptors actually hit us up and they wanted some custom planters for their team when they were out in Tampa Bay. And so we customized some with a local calligrapher. They shipped them on their private jet. And I was like, do you need someone to go with you? Like, I'll come. Like, I'll take care of the plants. I'll water them on the jet. We're good. But it was like peak COVID times. And so they literally put them on their jet, gifted them to the Raptors players. They did a whole video segment of the gifting of the planters and then also of the workshops that we were doing, and then posted it to their millions of followers. And from there, it kind of just blew up to the point where I had to quit my job. I had to make some time and space for this thing that I had no idea was going to turn into. And so that was 4 years ago. And yeah, I haven't looked back since.
It's a great problem to have, right? Let's get a little bit into sports brand and marketing. All of us here are working, as you said, Whitney, sort of building the brand from the ground up, whether it's that startup template. Can you touch a little bit about WNBA Toronto and just sort of their approach to sort of building the brand from the ground up? Yes, we do know there are other expansion teams or other teams that are already brand facing and they're out there, but Toronto is very unique. It's going to be Canada's team. So how do you go about that approach in terms of branding and marketing?
We want to know all the details.
I know.
Tell us.
I told Ainka before this, I'm like, I cannot say the team name. I'm like, do not say it. Do not say it. I will not say it. It will be revealed at some point in the future soon. No, it's been such an exciting process to be a part of. And yeah, it is really unique. It's the first international team for the W. And really, we are building it from the ground up. And I think an interesting approach, and I can't take credit for this because I only joined 6 weeks ago, but when the team was formed, they're like, we want to bring Canada along on the ride. We want to be really transparent about the process and kind of teach people too. And I'm learning a lot as we're going. So I'm sure some of you are aware, but they launched a campaign called nameyourteam.ca. Opened it up. Yeah, you submitted. Amazing. Thank you to everyone who submitted. And they opened it up to not just Canadians, but it was really globally. And so you could get a text or email, and there's like this box. You could put anything in there. It could be a name. It could be colors. It could be a meme. And one interesting stat, I think, is that 99.9% of the entries, and there were over 10,000, were positive. And you can imagine, normally if you just put a blank box on the internet, you're going to get some weird stuff. But no, it was so positive, and the excitement was amazing. We had submissions from every province, every territory, over 98 countries. And so that's just been a really cool process. So we've taken all of those submissions, and that's how we're coming up with the name and the logos and the colors. And we're going to be revealing it early in the new year, which we're really excited about. And then we want to continue to bring Canadians along. So next year's, it's an interesting year. We still don't have a team. We won't probably have a coach until the end of the year. So it's how do you keep building this brand without that team? And that's where building the community and the fandom and the fan base is going to be really important. So we're going to have lots of events, lots of community initiatives. So stay tuned for lots more exciting things.
That. Stay tuned.
You want to know?
Do you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, I think in terms of you were talking about branding. Yeah, building a brand. And I think for me, everything that I have done and I'm still doing with the Give and Grow is very unconventional. There's no framework. There's no guidelines. I'm doing whatever I want and having fun while doing it, to be honest. I'm able to collaborate and create conversations, to create events, like anything that I want to try, I have this unique ability to be able to do so. And I think when building the Give and Grow, if you're familiar with the basketball term, the give and go, that's kind of where the play on words comes in for the give and grow, but it's kind of true meaning is this idea of giving back to the community and help growing the next generation, specifically of girls and women. And so even just from the name and picking that name from when I started, I knew that this had to be more than just a product. It had to be more than something that I was selling. I had to have a specific mission and like really strong ethos behind it, which has always been in its name. The ability to give, and by giving you grow, and then you're able to grow in so many different ways. And so, like I said, building this brand, learning, working with the community members, working with different brand partners and sponsors, it's been such a great learning opportunity where as we grow and as we grow in scale, who can we take with us? Who can we bring along for the ride? And so I always say this at my panels and my anything that, or any speaking engagements, but lifting as you climb. And so, I have this ability to be in different spaces, different rooms. And I think what's so interesting about working with different like US teams and brands in the US is that they're like, Canada, literally, like they don't think about us in general. And so it becomes such a moment that I truly try to rep Toronto wherever I go. And I'm speaking to people and the first thing I say is I'm from Toronto and, I live and breathe Toronto, and that there's so many beautiful things that are happening here in the basketball community. There's so many amazing people that are uplifting each other that doesn't exist in other cities. And I don't think people realize how beautiful that is in general, because yes. Yeah, and it's because of people like you in the room that are showing up to these things, coming alone, breaking out of your comfort zones. There's this ability to, I think, connect with people specifically in Toronto and know that like you could feel comfortable in a space that really doesn't exist everywhere. And so as I travel into different US cities and work with different teams, just I'm observing kind of the way they work and things like that, there are moments where I'm like, man, like this would never swing in Toronto, or just in a good way where it made me so grateful for the partnerships and the peers that I've been able to work alongside with. And I think in Toronto, there's been a very special moment where there's a lot of us and women who are growing together, and we're all excelling. We're bringing each other with each other. We're hiring our friends. We're, creating those conversations. And so, I don't even know what this question was.
No, that was great. I picked up a lot.
I love Toronto. This is brought to you by.
This is not a Toronto commercial. No, I heart Toronto. I picked up a lot on what you said about bringing people along with you. When I started She's4Sports, there weren't a lot of stories on BIPOC women in sports at different levels. So I always looked at where are the gaps in media. We do know media is changing right now. Newsrooms are shrinking. Sports, reporters might be let go, and news and media is in a different space right now. So for me, it was like creating a platform, creating something I didn't see out there, and also looking at the stories we aren't telling. There are so many great women in sports. I met a lot of them. We've featured hundreds of them. Some of them I see in here in the room. I think of even someone like Fatria with the Muslim Women's Summer Basketball League. Yes. And looking around you to see the women in sports that their stories have not been told. Specifically in Toronto, we have no excuse when it comes to not interviewing somebody from different communities and hearing their stories and making them feel welcome in the sport, showing their contributions. We have no excuse in the city. And sometimes it does annoy me when I turn my TV on and I'm like, well, where's the diversity part when it comes to showing all of the faces, all of the voices of women in sport? We can't leave anybody behind. And if you are a content creator or a reporter, look at all the people that you've covered in the past. Who's who's missing from the stories that you're telling. So that's a lot of sort of the essence of where She's4Sports has come from. You mentioned a lot about when you're an entrepreneur and something hasn't been done before and you're just trying things. It's okay to fail too. Like you might try a campaign or to do an initiative and it just didn't go the way it looked on paper. It's okay. You just let that go and you move on the next day and you try something else. You try to work with, as you said, other sports collaborators or people that are trying to do the same things that you are doing. We're stronger together. And sometimes I feel like you could be on a journey where you're like, it's just me in the sports space. But look at all the women in here and all the great people in here who are doing wonderful things and are, supporters of women's sport. There's lots of people doing great things. So, don't be afraid to reach out and collaborate with them. And I've collaborated with some really great people. So I would definitely say for She's4Sports, we were looking at the gaps. We were looking at voices and stories that weren't being told. And we're also trying to bring people along with us. And again, I see some of you in the room.
Before you continue, sorry.
Yes.
I just want to give Ainka her flowers as well, because not only is she telling the stories that, again, aren't being heard, or she's amplifying, women's voices in a way where she's pressing on the necks of sponsors. She's like, let's pay them. Let's make sure they get paid. We're not going to do this for free and have a little interview and have a podcast. It's like, no, she's making an effort to also, yes. Women should get paid for what they do. And I think, you make very intentional effort to be able to say, hey, we're not doing this unless this happens. And there's a lot of times where, you want to get you in the door, you want to be able to share the story. So you're like, okay, well, I could do it or I could do it for free. But I think as women, we're so used to being very passive that like we need to collectively, ask for what we want and you shall receive. So I just wanted to give you a shout out for that as well.
Thank you. I'm like, I forgot about that. No. Whitney, did you want to talk a little bit more on anything more about the brand creative approach with the W or merchandising and activations? Was there anything that we forgot to mention?
No, I think my kind of problem statement or opportunity for next year is like we don't have a tangible product. Like we don't have a team with players. And up to this point, I feel like Teresa, our president, she's really been the face of the team. And I think she's starting to get a little tired. She's doing a lot of interviews. So next year, that piece around like we have community and culture, and I'm calling it court just for the third C, for branding. That's going to be really important. So the pieces around, we'll have merchandise available so we can start building that fan base. And lots of events, and not just in Toronto. We'll be hosting those in Montreal and Vancouver. I'm from Halifax, so I'd love to do some East Coast events as well.
Thank you for sharing that.
I have a question for Whitney. What has been the most challenging part when you're starting to narrow down, like to the wire, the colors, the logo, the team name? Like, how does that process? Like now that it's coming down to it, or has come down to it, what was the most challenging part, like during that last little bit? I think it's just you feel a lot of pressure. Like we're making history with this team, and we want to get it right. And so not everyone's going to love the name or the colors. And I totally understand that, but we really want to do right by the community because they've had such a big input into it. There's also the technicalities like IP. It's actually really hard finding names that haven't been trademarked or all the social handles taken. We're just making sure we're looking through it too with the lens of sensitivity. We don't want to offend anyone. We've had a really amazing design council that we've been using too. So we're making sure we're not just living in a silo in a box, and we're getting lots of different perspectives from lots of different groups. But I think it's just the pressure, because we really want people to love it and to love the team.
One quick thing, how are you working with the existing WNBA teams or the league itself to sort of keep that cohesive brand look? They've been very involved. They've been great. We have weekly syncs with the league, so we brought them along on the process. At the end of the day, it's our team and we get to name it, but definitely the commissioner, Kathy, had feelings about certain names, and we take that into consideration. But no, they've been amazing partners. Nike's also been an amazing partner. They're they do the jerseys, and so we had to bring them in early as well. But it's been a very collaborative process. At the end of the day, we're all just trying to grow women's sports. So we're all on the
same page.
Thank you. Let's touch a little bit on community. How does each of you bring community together around whether it's the Give and Grow or the WNBA Toronto in terms of your approach of bringing fans together, safe spaces, and maybe even working with local partners on campaigns around empowering women in sports, specifically basketball?
Sure, I'll take this one. I think as I mentioned earlier, that story about pulling on these strings that magically got me courtside to the WNBA game, it was just a matter of, again, like thinking about, who's in your life that is able to support you. And I think that we don't pull on each other's strings enough. I think everyone is really hesitant to ask for help. Everyone's hesitant to ask to collaborate. But I'm not. I'm like, hey, you want to do this? And they're like, if you don't, next person, And so I'm a big believer in just really like asking people and being very clear about what it is you want, but also making sure that there's an alignment. And so making sure that, yes, I could work with this partner, but is it aligned? Does it make sense? Are they doing it just to be showy? Are they doing it for the clout? Like sometimes it's really obvious, working with these different brands and partners that just want to hop on this wave of women's sports. And so it becomes a moment of a little bit of filtering and a lot of opportunities where I've had to say no to. That's been very, very difficult because it's like, okay, they want to pay me to do this thing, but it doesn't really align. And so it becomes a moment of like, okay, what are my values? What is the Give and Grow's values? Do they align with those values? And then going forward with something that's not always about kind of the paycheck. And so I think the more intentional you are about the partnerships that you're making, the people, the communities that you're integrating yourself with, it has to make sense, and it has to make sense to specifically you. If you don't sit right with it, like I mentioned, I've had to say no to some things, and there might have been really painful things to say no to, but it's brought me to a place where I now know exactly who it is I want to work with and the types of brands that I work with, that when I see these kind of red flags early on, it's really obvious to me. So I'm really grateful that I've been able to kind of say no and navigate that journey through the brand partnership side. And then working with the community side, it's been really great to, a lot of the brands will give me autonomy over, the community that I'm bringing in, specifically in Toronto. And so when I first started, there was this opportunity to say, hey, we'll sponsor this, you bring in your own community members. And it was a win-win situation for me where I could, bring in the Launchpad kids that I had known for years, or there's so many local kind of community groups and a few people in the room as well from Layup, Shoot for Peace, Kickback. And these are all just like great local community organizations that I had personal relationships with, that I was like, this is a perfect storm where, we have the brand willing to put up some of the costs. I provide the opportunity, and then my community gets to thrive and benefit from it. So again, it's really kind of this game of balancing, your values, what means the most to you. And then from there, just like being open to what comes to you from that, being able to set those boundaries really clear.
Whitney, how does the WNBA Toronto handle that balance? You mentioned earlier a little bit about partnering with the community, but also there's another side of that in terms of how you can integrate the storytelling around basketball, women's basketball, from different communities. So how are you all trying to approach that?
Yeah, I would say right now I've been doing a lot of learning. And so there's some great groups, like Layup's one of them, in this room who, I'm a bit new to this world. And so I'm just trying out right now to kind of understand, like, what are the best ways we can integrate into the community? What are the types of challenges that because, we have that power now as this new team coming in to help solve. And so some of the themes, we're hearing around accessibility, mentorship. One thing I was talking about one partner with, which was really interesting, and it's like a good and bad, was that women's sports is exploding so much, but because of that, there actually aren't enough female referees and coaches, and good coaches coming through the system. There's a lack of them. And so right now I think I'm just trying to learn as much as possible, and then put together kind of a strategy on how can we best impact the community and build our community. So yeah, there's kind of the two-pronged approach to that. And then on more of the brand side, it's just how are we ensuring that all these fans who have just been so excited for this team for so long, that we're engaging with them and making sure that we are maintaining this momentum and that it's not just a moment in time. Like this will continue.
Yeah, I like that. I think for She's4Sports, outside of the storytelling and creating safe spaces, I think for me as a business owner, it's also at the end of the year trying to figure out, in terms of that philanthropy piece or donating, which organizations do I want to donate to, whether it's Black Girls Hockey Club, Layup, and who's doing that intentional work and where do I want to sort of support where I can at the end of the year. So I think there's that piece with She's4Sports as well, outside of bringing the community together and highlighting the voices in the community that, as I said, some voices we haven't heard from. So that's sort of how we tackle community, and also just working with folks like Jumpstart, working with Canadian Women in Sport, working with those companies that want to do something about engaging community, want to do something about seeing and hearing diverse voices, in terms of their stories and their athlete journeys or sport leaders' journeys. There are these larger companies now that want to partner with companies like a She's4Sports, like a Give and Grow. We talked about sort of our entrepreneurial sort of startup, model. They want to work with us because we have those relationships with the communities, that it's authentic. And we also can advise as to how to approach the community, how to approach these campaigns. So that's sort of how we approach connecting with the community. Now, we want to make sure we get your questions in because the timing is kind of going. Is there anything else I missed, or do you want to touch on anything, or do you want to get into the Q&A?
No.
Yeah. Okay. Don't be shy. I like that. Green shirt, you were like right up there.
Should we bring mics?
Yeah.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah.
Stand. What's your name?
Tell us where you're from.
Toronto.
Yes. She said it with her full chest.
Toronto.
I like that.
I've been a sports fan in Toronto my whole life. My band is called Sports Fan. I'm a big believer in Toronto. I think a big reason for that is Toronto's very unique emphasis in sports on not only getting great athletes to come here, but getting great people to come here. I think Masai is obviously a great North Star for that. And I think that builds the community we're talking about, obviously, through lore and the little details. I'm wondering from your perspective, when you think about introducing the future team to the city, what is on your must-have list for storytelling in that way through the players?
Who wants to go first?
Yeah, no, that's a great question and something that's been extremely top of mind. No, we've been talking about that. It's like Toronto is such an amazing city, and we're going to have this opportunity to bring players from other places. And it's like, how are we going to tell that story? We've had some interesting ideas around probably some that wouldn't fly now, like putting billboards in the other cities, just being like, Toronto's way better, which we won't do. But I honestly don't even think it'll be that hard of a sell. Yeah, totally. Like when you think even of like a lot of the Raptors former players, like Kyle Lowry, it's like he speaks so highly of this city. And and I also think there's interesting nuances of it being like Canada that will be good and bad. But I think I won't get into too many of the nuances. But no, we've been thinking through this a lot. It's very top of mind. I'm not giving a great answer right now. But I think also, there's going to be other people we can reach out to in the city to just potentially talk to the athletes about their experience moving here, the different types of resources that we have available. And I honestly think if people just come spend some time here, visit, they'll also fall in love.
Totally. 24 hours. I always say that to my friends that come.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I was just going to say that in general, women and female athletes and female basketball players, they're so multifaceted and such amazing people that, being a multifaceted athlete in a multifaceted city where, we could cater to any of those things, whether it's art or fashion or food, whatever that is that the player enjoys, Toronto has that market for it. So I think there's a really unique opportunity to be brain dump all the things that are define you as a player outside of the court. And then we could find alignment in the community, find alignment with brands and really think about how we can market the players themselves and things that happen to or things off the court. We have a unique opportunity to do that, I think.
Yeah, that's actually a great point. And that's something we've talked about a lot. Like women are just good storytellers.
Totally.
Like, more so
Naturally.
than male athletes.
Yeah.
Not a knock on male athletes, but just women tend to be. And so, yeah, I think that's a big thing is like come to the city and like and partners like this can help tell your story. And I think that will be a big appeal.
Beautiful. I love that.
Yeah, I was going to say, for me, it's just looking for those stories. I mean, right now, She's4Sports has a series called Convos with the W. We just started it. So we have been trying to tell the stories and connect with the athletes in the W, and expose, and engage their stories with Canadian fans, because in the absence of that, we're all going to the American channels or the American platforms to find things. So that's the gap that we're trying to fill. We recently interviewed Kia Nurse, and we're going to be interviewing Aaliyah Edwards very soon. But just kind of looking around at what are the other adjacent stories. There's so many people doing great work in the city, even at the grassroots level, at the recreational level. So I think just a balance of those community stories, and also a balance of these women who've kind of made it to the top in the WNBA. I think we're just trying to look for those stories and find the right balance. But I think there's so many great people doing things here that if you just look for those people from different neighborhoods, different communities, you'll find them. Yeah.
Beautiful. Thank you.
Thank you. I see one in the back and one over there. I'm going to go to the back first. You want to go after? Okay.
Made my job. Thank you so much.
I was trying to give the guys some shine as well. Balance it out.
Hi,
Pass the
friends.
test,
Hi.
My name is Shireen Ahmed. I'm actually a Haligonian, so what up?
Love it.
I'm a sports journalist as well. Ainka, I wanted to talk to you about something you said, which is so important. A lot of people in the room who may be afraid to take that step. And as entrepreneurial, you talked about that. That's really where some of the storytelling comes from. How do you get over failing? Because we're still at a place in society where getting an opportunity we should be grateful for. How do you misstep? And then what does it take from all of you, it's not too personal to share, to keep going, because we got to keep going. And love what Olivia said about heartstrings, but it's not just that grind, it's that, how do we do that?
Yeah, for me, She's4Sports has always been a passion project for me. Some of you know my story, some of you might not. I've always been working in a corporate job and running She's4Sports at the same time. I'm kind of at a place now, it's been 8 years, where I'm sort of transitioning into running She's4Sports full time. When you're running a business, you might not have all the answers. You might not be able to leave your full-time job and do your other thing right away. Everybody has a different journey. So I would definitely say stick to the passion piece, do what you can. Some nights where I'd see other people posting about things or posting more than me, I'm like, I should be posting more. And you kind of beat yourself up, but just do what you can. All of us in this room could do what we can to grow women's sports. Whether you're on social and you're reposting things, whether you're somebody that's able to donate to a place like Layup or Muslim Summer Women's Basketball League, or whether you're someone who could just tell a friend, let's go to a PWHL game together and actually, get a ticket for a game. You are all contributing to growing women's sports. So I would definitely say, like, from your vantage point and from your space of where you can help and support, and if that's a passion for you, find a way to do that. And that's sort of what I did with She's4Sports. But it is hard. It's I think for most entrepreneurs, it's never easy. I think a challenge for me, you're always looking at, who's the next sponsor or partner you're going to work with. And for all of you who know about pitching to people, not always a lot of fun, a lot of decks, a lot of, making sure your elevator pitch is succinct, making sure you did some research about the company so you know what their values are and what your values are. And as Olivia said, make sure you align, because if you're trying to work with someone and your values don't align with theirs, and maybe they're just jumping on this trend, they're like, oh, women in sports is so hot right now. We just got to tick off this diversity or inclusion box. That's not who you want to work with, right? You want to really strengthen those relationships and work with people that are, doing things for the right reasons. So yeah, it's not easy, but I keep on going because it's a passion of mine. 8 years ago, in terms of the media space and digital content of women's sports, from my vantage point in Toronto and Canada, there wasn't much going on. I mean, all of you are very familiar with The Gist, and they've expanded to the US now, but outside of that, there's not much going on. There's Together, a platform in the States, developed by a couple of Olympians and professional athletes, but there still isn't a lot. So if you have a wonderful idea, in the back of your mind on how to grow women's sport or to amplify women's sports voices, do it. Just press that green button and do it. I didn't have all the answers, and it's still going. And I'm sure whatever you're planning or thinking of doing, it's going to be great. Thank you. Yes.
Okay, first and foremost, I would like to say this is a beautiful event. I'm very grateful to be here. Shout out to Michaela and Hannah for inviting me from Layup, because I know how important this is, because 90% of my opportunities, it came from women, especially growing up in a single parent household. I really appreciate women a lot. And my question might be more for Whitney. However, both of you can answer. So how do you think the WNBA's presence in Toronto will influence the landscape of Canadian sports, especially for young women and girls interested in sports?
Thank you so much for the question and for saying that. I think it's going to change it massively. It's the first professional women's basketball team in the country, and a big thing that we know is you have to see it to believe it. Jumpstart has a program called Play the Lead, and so it's like, how do we develop kind of that next level of generational talent? And often you have to see it. So when I was growing up, I had like a massive Michael Jordan poster in my bedroom, and I love Michael Jordan. But then I remember, I won't age myself, when I was about 10 years old, the WNBA launched. And I remember like telling my mom, I'm like, oh my God, like the WNBA is going to play today on NBC. And I remember watching like Lisa Leslie and Cheryl Swoops. And then I had a poster of them in my bedroom. And so it was like just even having those role models to see, it changed my life. And then, and even though I didn't become a professional basketball player, I felt like they were still influential in my life. So I think just having this team here, the athletes, the players, but not just the team, it's like the community that's going to be around it, like nationally, I think it's going to be really massive. It's going to bring more exposure to women's sports. It's going to force those conversations with partners on like, are you also supporting the women's sports system? So I think it'll be, just extremely impactful. Thanks for the question.
Next question.
Hi, my name's Nat. It's a little bit of a follow-up to his question, more towards Whitney. We saw with the Raptors, We of the North happened very organically across the country. Everyone rallied behind Canada's team. I was wondering if you have intentional fan engagement for the entire country, or if you think it'll happen and reverberate naturally.
Yeah, and it's a great question, something we talk about all the time. It also really helps when you win a championship.
That
the country really rallies behind you. No, I love the Raptors, but I think we are being very intentional. So even like Larry Tenenbaum, our owner, like in every press conference he's done, he's like, this is Canada's team. Every meeting we're in with him, he's like, what does the logo look like without Toronto in it? It's like he wants to really know that. So next year, there'll be games that will be played in Vancouver, in Montreal, hopefully more cities. We'll be hosting fan festivals in those different markets. And everything we do, we want it to feel very inclusive. We're thinking through like how things look in French right now as well. So absolutely. Even though, it'll be based in Toronto and we know it's really important to Torontonians, we'll try to make it feel really national.
Do you have to have a French version of the team?
You don't.
Okay.
But it's just something we thought about in the process.
Because then sometimes like that French word could be something.
Yeah.
You're like, that doesn't sound like very. Yeah, and you're like, wait a minute.
For marketing and branding, it's not always easy.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there another question? Oh.
Hello, Shannon or DJ Shannon Hill. I had a question, I guess more so directed towards Whitney. First of all, thank you guys for all being here and for even putting this together. This is phenomenal.
Thank you.
Yeah, clap for that. My question is, a lot of us who are familiar with the W know who Ellie is. I don't even have to go any further. Like, you guys know who Ellie is.
Yes. Obsessed with her.
I'm curious, are you currently like looking for a mascot? Like, what are you looking for in a mascot to kind of make
applying?
Do you want to our country?
Are you applying? Do you want to be like?
That would be crazy, but no, I'm just curious. Cause like Ellie has built pretty much, honestly, Ellie has really helped elevate the W for what it is today. And, it's making New York stand out. It's making the W stand out. But we're Canada and Toronto. I was just curious if there's any sort of thought process behind the mascot or like what. Yeah,
That's a
my
really
question.
good question. I was going to say you got to sort of wave at Ellie when you were.
Oh yeah, I went to Game 5 for Ellie.
Yeah.
The Ellie concert.
She got content.
And there happened to be a championship going on right at the same time. That was my question.
Well, it's nice to meet you, Shannon, in person too. It's a great question. I'm obsessed with Ellie. I feel like the Liberty have just set the bar very high across just the fan experience in general. And so it's definitely come up. And yes, we have discussed our mascot. And then the interesting stat is that only 3 of the mascots in the WNBA are female, which also shocked me. Yeah, it was
a female character.
A female character. Yeah. And so we haven't finalized our mascot, but I will say we're trying to do everything in with a unique approach. And so when we are able to unveil it, we are taking a unique approach there. But I would say Ellie's definitely been inspiration for us and has set the bar very high that we're we need to be able to compete, her accessories, just everything.
The dance moves, I was going to say, if you're auditioning, the dance moves.
And to make her very Toronto, Ellie's very New York, right? So it's really funny that it's what's the persona of Toronto? It's so many things.
Yeah, so we have that's been one of the more fun parts of my job.
An animal, yeah.
I love having the meetings about what's the mascot? What's it look like? So
I like that question because it also, allows us to think about the activations. And I think it's the Mystics. Do they have a WNBA and brunch? Yes. I thought I heard that. So before the game? So what could our activations be? What could our mascots be? How to get people even more excited than we are? Thank you. That was a really good question.
Hi, my name is Dede and I'm from Hamilton, McMaster. But my question is, I just recently had a birthday.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And I just kind of had a moment, I guess, of a midlife crisis. I've been in sport since my birthday happened. I'm like, oh my God, 20 years. This is crazy. So my question actually is to all 3 of you for each of your respective portfolios. I always led myself with what legacy could I leave with whatever position I was in. So for example, I started my career with amateur boxing. So I was the first Black technical director of amateur boxing in Ontario.
Let's just give that a clap.
I've always thought, what legacy would you guys like to leave? So with your portfolios, what would the WNBA, when all is said and done, what would the WNBA say? You know what, we've done it. We're good. If we were shut down today, that's no problem. So the same thing for Give and Go and the same thing for your portfolio. What legacy would you like to leave?
For me, I don't have kids, but I have a goddaughter and my best friend also has a daughter. When my friends send them She's4Sports videos and they're like, oh, we've interviewed this woman in sport, and they can see as little girls, one day I might be able to be the GM of a team. One day I might be able to be a sports reporter at CBC. I want young girls to feel like it's possible. Yes, we all know, trying to navigate a career in sports, being a woman is not always easy. But I think for the next generation, that visibility piece, those stories that they connect to see other women, that's the legacy I want to leave for that generation to be like, oh, I just saw a woman who was in Taekwondo, or I saw a sports nutritionist, or I saw a woman in sports who is a referee. And just by seeing it, they might believe that they can also have that job in the future. That's a legacy I'd like to leave.
I think the way that I perceive legacy and impact is really just through my personal interactions with people. And so every time I interact with someone, I hope that they leave with a good feeling or just this reciprocative energy that is positive. And that's what I aim to do with everyone I meet all the time. And so I think that if we can create these moments where, you're connecting with someone even for a brief moment, that is your legacy. If this is the only interaction we're ever going to have, and you remember that whatever it is that I did for you or I shared with you, if I can just impact one other person, that would be my legacy in terms of how I interact with the world around me. And I think I've always moved with that intention throughout my entire life. And so I've been able to really be able to capitalize on that where I'm at right now, where it's hey, I have a business, I have something to offer. a lot of the connections that I've made and a lot of the opportunities that I've got have been people that, you know, I worked at a bar with back in Hamilton, or I worked at an after school program with, or, you know, it was my barista at the coffee shop. And so it was all these little moments where I was able to connect with people that you never know where that's going to take you. And so, yeah, I think my legacy is just, you know, being my most authentic self and being able to share that with the world around me.
And that's a great question. I would say this has actually been very top of mind lately. It's like, what is our purpose at WNBA Toronto? And like, what is our mission? And so we actually met last week about this. And one key theme that came out is like, we want to like inspire joy. And that can come to fruition in many different ways. So that could be, you know, inspiring like young girls and boys to like start playing the game and to be excited and to build their body confidence and self-esteem. But we are also seeing it in lots of different ways. So I met with a woman last week who was in her mid-50s. She played basketball when she was younger, hasn't played since. And then she's so excited about the team coming to town. Like she started playing in a pickup league again. And she's like, it's so much fun. And like, I forgot about that. So she's like really bringing that joy back into her life. And we're hearing lots of stories about that. I'm hearing like groups of women being like, oh, we're going to get like season ticket deposits to the game because it's like going to be a girls' night out. And I just think there's going to be lots of those stories and ways to bring like joy into people's lives through this team and hopefully to inspire a lot of people.
Hello, my name's Hasina. So I wanted to ask, I know basketball has gotten more popular, but there's still a gap between the popularity compared to men's basketball. So do you think that women's basketball can ever reach that same level of popularity as men's basketball? And if so, what are some key steps into making that happen? And especially here in Toronto, like I know when Toronto like loves something, they love something and they'll support it. So how can that happen?
Yeah, I think there's a few different ways. One I had like mentioned a bit earlier is like exposure. So it's like just right now, it's like our broadcast doesn't get a ton of WNBA games. So I think having that exposure, getting people to like know the different players, that will be massive and that'll help close the gap. I think on a more foundational level, even we're seeing like at school age, basketball more prevalent with like young boys than young girls. I think we have to look at like, what are those root issues? So a lot of it's around that confidence. It's like, why are girls stopping playing basketball or don't feel comfortable in organized sport? So that's not an easy thing to do, but some of the amazing partners in this room are working on things like that. So I think that will help close the gap. And then there's just other interesting things like in coaching. One thing I learned is the way you coach a girl is like different than the way you coach a boy. Like injuries are different. And so I think it's like training that next level of like coaches will be really important as well. But I am optimistic we will close the gap.
I was at the New York Liberty Parade a couple of weeks ago, and it was very tame, to be honest. It was like, I looked around, it was very easy for me to get a front row spot. I was kind of like, okay, in a place like New York, where there's millions of people, you know, and so it was really interesting because, you know, as much as we see this buzz about women's basketball and the W and everything, like a lot of that exists just online, to be honest. Like, it's not as prevalent when you're in the spaces, and when you're in those spaces and you start to look around, you're like, okay, there's actually a lot of women here and families and kids. And it becomes a moment of like, okay, speaking to your question, like, will it ever be as big as men's, or what does that look like? I mean, historically, we've never had the chance, right? And so it becomes this new moment where it's like, hey, we're going to give Toronto a chance to show up and show out. And I think it really does also start with men and our allies and the people that can amplify our sport and our world in a really different way. And so it was really interesting being at the game. It was obviously amazing being at the parade, but I also experienced the Raptors parade here in Toronto, the Raptors parade, and afterwards when we won the championship, everyone was on the streets, people were climbing scaffolding and things like that. So it becomes a really interesting, obviously the fan base is different, but it became really apparent to me that I was like, this could be so much bigger and better. And it was still beautiful. The parade was still beautiful, but it was very easy to walk around. It was very easy to get from point A to point B. And it was also telling in a place like New York, it's like, who's going to leave their job to come watch the parade? And it seemed like there could have been so much more support in a different way. But that, like I said, it comes from the allies, it comes from the men, it becomes, you know, something that we all have to play a part of.
One thing I want to just touch on quickly is I've been having this discussion with a lot of women in sports and even men in sports. We have to stop comparing women's sports and men's sports as the same. Like, you know, sometimes you'll hear someone say, oh, she's the LeBron James of whatever. No, she's who she is, right? And I think we have to look at women's sports as a new, exciting product. If you look at the PWHL, they've included different aspects of the game. I think there was the jailbreak rule, and they're going to be adding some new things in the new season. We have to start looking at the men's sports and the women's sports differently. This is women's sports, exciting new product, different aspects of the game. Players have different stories, and we shouldn't compare the two. And I think that's also where we would get that popularity, where we stop comparing both. I also just want to read a quick stat. Last season, NCAA, there were more viewers watching the women's college basketball than the men's, and I believe it was 8.7 million viewers on ABC, and the ESPN was peaking at 24 million viewers. I'm not sure if that was the final March Madness game for women's basketball, but they did say it, in terms of viewership, it outpaced the men's. So women's sports is popular. I just wanted to add that. I think we're wrapping up now with this discussion. Whitney, Olivia, and loved everything that you said. It's inspiring to be in a space with other women who are trying to grow the game and doing things that are just amazing. And I really enjoyed all of your questions. It was a really fruitful discussion. Is this what we have? Do you want to present?
Whitney, this is for you. We made a custom